Gentlemen, let's talk Man of
Yes.
Steel.
Oh boy.
The big movie of the last week. Let's do this the way we usually do it. Bob, did you have a mini review?
I do. Here's what I think of Man of Steel, and I'm very curious to watch Nick's reaction during my reading of this. But yeah, we'll see. Man of Steel. I'm giving it a 3 out of 5. The nice production value, pretty visuals, and even Russell Crowe had a hard time making up for the flat characters and uneven pacing. It felt like if you put all superhero movies into a blender and poured out the result, you'd get this, a reboot of Superman. Not bad, but somehow just as boring as it is exciting.
I'm gonna have to ask you to do mini reviews maybe next time, Bob. Goodness gracious.
That was almost 6 sentences.
It was like 2 or 3. Come on.
No, just playing. All right. Have you released that anywhere? Have you gotten any buzz from that yet?
Not yet. I'm trying something new this week. I'm going to release it with the video version because I want to see what people think.
Awesome. I guess my old script failed me. Well, I'll go with my minute review, and then we'll see if Nick has a couple sentences he'd like to say. Then we will dive in.
Yes.
All right. Man of Steel. About 50% of a movie I'd like to see, and 75% of a movie I don't care much about. All combined into 125% of a movie.
Yeah. Sounds about right. It was a little long.
All right, Nick, do you have a couple sentences to start us off before we dissect it?
Yeah, so Superman had me super excited, and it kind of left me super flat in a few areas. I got a lot of mixed feelings, and I'm sure they're going to come out. But overall, I liked it.
Rock and roll.
Okay.
That was a good
Positive.
minute review.
Yeah, I like it.
So let's talk about some of the themes and the story we have here. It's a lot of movie, but let's start. So one of the things I liked, guys, is it had some of the all-American Superman themes. Superman is about as American of a superhero as we have, both in the sense that he's been with us forever, it seems like, one of the first big comic book guys, and also just everything about him seems to represent being an American.
Truth, justice, and the American way. That's what
That's-
Superman stands for.
That's right. And he even says at one point, there's a line, I grew up in Kansas. I'm about as American as they come.
I know, which is ironic because we watched Henry Cavill give a statement at the beginning in his accent. Right before the show started, I went to a sneak preview, and I was like, he's not even American. How can he be Superman?
I know it. That's gets a little weird. He does look like a
Those
good
actors.
I know.
But some of the themes, the classic themes that make Superman one of our national myths. You know, he has this great potential, and it's his life's journey to realize his potential and to decide to use it for good, to give back. It's like a classic hero's journey there.
Definitely.
And just to find out who you are reminds me of Simba and Mufasa.
Uh-huh.
Forget
And-
who you
and-
are.
And his big struggle of wanting so much to be human, but never being able to fully be human. It's kind of like Data from Star Trek,
Yeah.
you know? That same issue of he's not human, he'll never be human, but in many ways he represents the best of humanity.
Yeah, so all these things, and you might be able to say they're cliches, but at the same time they're universal, and I have to say that those classic archetypes were a plus for me in this movie. I liked when it explored those. I don't know if I'm a softy, sentimental guy, but I thought that was a plus for the movie.
I think more than any other comic book character, Superman gets the archetype pass card. He is the archetypal superhero. He is the archetypal hero's journey character.
Yeah.
And he breaks that mold a lot less because he kind of carries that banner of that's his role.
Yeah, totally agree. So let's talk about the story a little bit, and we're going to try to keep this mostly spoiler-free at this point. Is that what we're thinking, guys?
Whoa.
Okay.
All right.
Well, pause, time out. Inside podcast here. Well, what do we think? Is this spoiler or is this Is this a recap or a review?
I don't know how much there is to spoil, to be honest. Even if I were to reveal a spoiler, it's not like people. There's nothing in here like Iron Man or that's going to be bad for you if you know about it in advance. I can't think of one thing that would be spoiled. That's just me,
Yeah,
though.
it's pretty much Superman's story. I think everybody knows it.
Okay, fair enough. Break from our timeout. All right, so um, the story. So one of the things that featured heavily, and I'm sure Bob has a comment on this, is the way it used flashbacks to give us the story.
Yes, normally flashbacks drive me crazy, and by normally I mean this time they did too. Uh, uh, I enjoyed Kevin Costner as his biological or human father, whatever you want to call it. But I liked the original Superman in its more linear approach, and this one kept going back and forth, and that was part of the pacing problem for me. Just as something might get interesting, then it's like, now let's look at Superman at age 11 instead of age 6, and it's just like, yeah, we get it. Okay, I would have liked it all up front.
I think it would have been really weird up front, personally. Um, the character development just brought out little aspects of him and threw it in there. I think Kevin Costner would have had to have a much smaller role if it was all up front.
Yeah,
And
fine by me.
I kind of liked him. All right.
Well, what if
Well,
it
I'm
would
just
have
saying.
gone... Go ahead, Bob.
Oh, I was just gonna say, what other superhero movie has as much as this in terms of like character development through childhood? I know it's important to Superman, but really, like, how much are we losing by having it be like 2 minutes instead of 20?
Good point. Good point. We just would have lost a lot of time, and to me, it kind of felt like there was two themes going on there. One was like Superman versus trying to be human, and one was Superman versus Zod.
Yeah.
And we probably would have lost a whole theme of the movie.
So to bring up Zod, Nick, give us a little bit of enlightenment here. How is Zod a classic Superman character?
Yeah, well, he definitely is part of the big canon of who Superman is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his history. Um, the weird thing about Superman is he's been around so long. There's different versions of all these stories.
Comic books are notorious for having a reboot where things are the same but different, right?
Uh-huh. But I think Zod is probably one of Superman's greatest foes because he kind of fights two kinds of things. He fights people who are smarter than he is, and he fights things that are stronger than he is.
Zod
Right?
does.
No, Superman does. And Zod kind of makes this combination of both those things come together. He's a
I see. So
genius
Lex
strategist.
Luthor is like strong or smarter than Superman, as is one of his classic foes, for example.
Uh-huh, yeah.
Okay.
And Doomsday is a classic example of somebody who's probably stronger than Superman.
Okay.
But Zod combines both of them, and in a way, kind of makes the perfect enemy for Superman.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'd never heard of Zod, but I'm not really a comic book of Superman aficionado. Was the story about Zod, his backstory, was that more or less canonical?
There was a lot of stuff happening on the planet of the history of Krypton
Mm-hmm.
that I had never heard before. I mean, I don't pretend to know everything about this huge history of Superman, but I was not particularly aware of how this whole Civil War and how the planet blew up and all this backstory that went into that. But more or less, I'd say, yeah, he was the general on Krypton and got sentenced to the Phantom Zone and really hates Superman.
Yeah, so that's the other thing I want to talk about while we're on the story part. Now, and Bob, this is where you can sort of help induct me. I haven't been watching too many summer blockbuster movies in recent years, but now since we're doing this, I'm biting the bullet and going to see more. Is this just how it goes? It's sort of thin on story and motivation? Because I was really trying to pay attention about just exactly why Zod was so mad at Superman or at Russell Crowe's character, Jor-El, that he wanted to go and kill Kal-El. And I wasn't quite clicking for me.
No, I don't think it has to be this way. I think Hollywood often falls into this trap, but I felt it very one-dimensional, and the sequence of events at the beginning were also just perfectly timed for, and then we're going to show this, and then this happens right at this, and then his mom's going to die in exactly this time. That's in between the time where she could have left or stayed, or Zod destroys things. Like everything was waiting for the last thing to happen. And in real life, of course, a natural disaster and somebody escaping and then somebody having an epic fight scene, they're not all lined up perfectly in the right order for the exposition. And that's not the only thing. It just felt like everything, it just was indicative of the overall problem, which was, it was a manufactured problem. I could sort of see through the seams and didn't feel like there was a real issue going on here. They were all on the same side, and they were all like just taking a slightly different stance on how to deal with life. I felt like if they all waited about 5 minutes, they could have all convinced each other to just do what. Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of had that feeling too. It's like, wait a second, if we just talk about this calmly, maybe we can figure out something that works for everyone.
But everything was so serious, like the way Zod talks and the way they talk to each other, and through the whole movie, even the human part of We're on Earth, it's like, gosh, somebody crack a joke. Jeez.
I noticed that. About all the way through the joke at the very end when that female captain, when the general says, "What are you laughing at or smiling at?" And she finally has her little joke. I realized that was the only time that anyone had even kind of smiled in the whole theater, and it was still pretty half-hearted.
Yeah, there was one other time, but I thought it was a cheap shot, so I don't even count it in the same category. When
like Superman, that's what everyone's calling him.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking. Yeah, that was an eye roller more than anything. But I was thinking there was a little bit of some laughter in the theater on the scene where he's in the bar and he has to walk away, and then what he ends up doing is like, in a very un-Jesus-like fashion, if we're supposedly comparing him to Jesus, he ends up like mangling the dude's truck in this articulate, artistic form of manglement, and it just was very like, ha ha ha, property damage instead of just punching somebody. Okay.
I know, that was weird, right? I'm glad I was the only person thinking that's not really Superman style. He
Not at
also
all.
stole the clothes he wore for the first early Clark Kent scenes, right? That's not
true.
Superman.
Right.
Speaking of what isn't Superman, and this might be one spoiler, so plug your ears for about a minute here. Tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, Nikk. But I thought Superman doesn't kill.
So I think that's debatable, and that's, I think, one of the huge debates going around to this thing, right?
Uh-huh.
Superman kind of has this rule. Superman doesn't kill. He's come really close a bunch of times. He's tried to. But if you really dissect the canon, early Superman, who was just still kind of weird and grown into his character, killed a few times.
Okay. And this was sort of an early Superman thing, apparently.
Well, no, we're talking like not early in the character storyline of Superman. We're talking early in
early in the comic books.
First comic books, when Superman didn't fly, he jumped over cars.
Okay.
But there's a few times. Most of them are kind of in these weird alternate universes. He actually killed Zod in the Pocket universe.
So it's a callback to that, and if he is going to kill someone, Zod would be a good candidate then.
Yeah, Zod's somebody you can argue that for. Also, Doomsday in the classic The Death of Superman storyline.
Yes.
They kind of fight to the death and they kill each other. But it wasn't Superman really trying to murder him in that case. It was just he gave his all to stop him and finally accomplished it, and that's what it took with Doomsday.
Okay, so it's more of a guideline than a rule, huh?
Yeah, but with Superman, I feel like it kind of is still a rule. You have a few weird places where it's happened, but they're so far removed from the heart and the canon of what Superman is that I think this shocked me. It really shocked me. It's the thing that I left the movie saying, it's Superman, but it's not the spirit of Superman. Superman always gets faced with these choices, and somehow he finds a way.
Yeah.
He doesn't fit the same rules that a Batman or like even you and I would,
Hmm.
because Superman always makes the right choice.
Yeah, that's a very Superman thing that he makes the right choice, lets the consequence follow, um,
Hmm.
and so that was controversial, I guess, and it didn't quite sit right for you, is what you're saying.
Well, I was torn between it because I feel like in a modern world, now that I'm a little bit more adult, I would have made a decision much like Superman and felt like it was the right choice.
Hmm.
But not Superman. Superman
Right.
doesn't have to make um,
Hard choices.
those hard choices. He just it always works out because he's Superman.
That's
That's his legacy.
one of his superpowers.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Did you have something on that, Bob, or can I move on?
Well, I was just going to say, so not killing to me is like the inverse of free pass on unlimited property damage, because
That happened
it seems
anyway.
like well, it seems like so
There was
again,
a lot of carnage.
yeah, there's tons, and it was cool to watch and everything, but it seems like all of that could have been saved. If Zod is such an evil character anyway, and it took him like wanting to kill a mother and child or family or just normal people that aren't in military uniform, if he would have just tried that like 10 minutes earlier, it would have cost like seriously $2 billion less, because then Superman would have had, I guess, the right motivation in the right moment. Is that what we're saying? Is
And I'm
like,
sure not everyone got out of those buildings.
Oh,
right.
definitely not.
Yeah. I don't know. It just
So
felt, yeah.
yeah, Zod, this brilliant military strategist, he really they identified his weakness as this moral code he lived by. Why didn't they take advantage of that? He's brilliant. He's got a mom sitting there in Kansas. Why not capitalize on that? Or Lois Lane, who he has an affinity for, or you know, all these things. They didn't worry about Superman. In fact, they split their forces when the only real threat, Superman, was still to be fought. I didn't see brilliant strategists from Zod.
So they sort of robbed Zod of one of his great things, his brilliance, is what you're saying in this movie.
Yeah, yeah, he kind of waxed a little more redneck at times, and I think that's one of my biggest problems with the movie is a superhero story can only be as good as its bad guy.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to move on to talk about a few more aspects of this. What did you feel about the acting performances here? In fact, I'll start off with maybe a couple provocative things. I didn't like all of them. The one I liked least was Amy Adams as Lois Lane. I'll throw that out there.
Yep.
She I didn't buy her as a tough, hard as nails reporter. It seemed more like a little girl trying to play grown up. That's just how she read to me for some reason.
I
That's
think you
like,
nailed that. Nailed it. She's a hard sell for Lois Lane, and you kind of like some of the cutesy interplay between her and Superman, but you don't see her as this powerhouse of a hard nosed reporter.
Yeah. So we agree on that one, huh? That wasn't so controversial?
no, I don't think so. Not among us anyway. I mean, Amy Adams is an adorable person, and but she's playing the character like she's played like 90% of her other characters, and it doesn't work for Lois Lane.
Yeah, like the Disney princess version of Lois Lane or something like that.
Right. Exactly.
The other one that didn't quite sit with me was Zod. Was that who was it? Michael Shannon? How come I'm blanking here?
It is Michael Shannon.
For some reason, it didn't quite vibe with me. Although
Yeah.
I didn't hate it as much.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys remember the old school
Oh,
Superman
yes.
2 with Zod.
Two. Yes.
Yeah, what was that guy? Terrence Stamp? He was he
Yes.
had that like cool intelligence that I wish if you could just put a little bit of that into Michael Shannon's performance, I think I would have loved him as Zod.
Mm,
But
mm.
like
Yeah.
I said, he went more towards this I'm just an angry little kid or redneck feel that took me out of Zod's character quite
Well,
often.
he almost felt robotic to me. Just everything is raw, Superman. Cal, blah, 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 and like just this cadence and the way he communicated, it was just like, dude, lighten up, take the stick out of your. I don't know.
In his defense, he did have a pretty rough setup. His life was pretty crappy.
Yeah.
He's a general, though. I don't know.
And what do we call him? Cavill as Superman. I felt like he was fine, but not amazing.
Really, I loved him as Superman. What we didn't
Oh,
get from him was his alter ego, Clark Kent, never went into mild-mannered reporter, right? They kind of
Sure.
robbed that whole thing from the section, and it'd be hard to pull it off well now at the end. I'm trying not to spoil things, so I'm wording it weirdly. But anybody who's seen it should know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, okay, I thought, because what he had was, maybe it's appropriate for Superman, but he had certainly this corn-fed Kansas sort of demeanor, and he has that sort of naive persona. Maybe that's exactly what Superman sort of needs. That, gee willikers, shucks.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
It just made him not that relatable to me. And maybe I'm not Kansas enough, but he felt pretty flat, and I don't know what the intrinsic value is of this whole all-American. I'm all-American. I'm from Kansas. I pick fruit off the trees. Therefore, everyone will love me by default, and no further character development needed. That's my issue.
All right. Well, I want to talk about one more thing. We have to talk about this, I think, if we're going to really evaluate the movie, and that is the visual effects. Someone else should go first. Bob, what did you think about the special effects?
They were very well done in my opinion. I didn't see the seams necessarily, or didn't have like technical issues, but they were so fast in certain scenes that maybe I'm just jaded and it's a first world problem of having seen these types of movies too much, but I was just like, oh, a bus flew through another tall building that's falling over and people have to run out of the way. Epic. Snoozer. I don't know. Somehow it felt like too generic, or something about it was not as exciting as it should have been for me watching the whole world be destroyed through these guys throwing stuff around.
There were a couple things I really liked. Let me see if you agree on any of this, or if not, that's fine too. I liked Superman flying on this one a lot. Like he to put his arms out like this, and to turn, he would like put one arm back, and it just, I don't know. It reminded me of how I imagined Superman flying a lot more than I've ever seen in a Superman movie before. Also, in the fight that was in the middle, the big fight in the middle in the town, there were a couple points where I thought it was really cool and it looked almost comic booky. Like it was like super fast, but it would freeze for a second on some of the pow uppercuts and things like that. And I thought that was actually pretty cool.
Especially with that Kryptonian girl, I thought she looked awesome when she was fighting.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm thinking about too. So some of those things I thought were pretty well done.
Yeah, the effects were fine. They looked cool. I liked what was going on. I liked the action. I'm not sure that's the same thing we're talking about, but being punched through 5 buildings. Come on, that's a Superman level hit. You don't see that in many more shows. You get knocked into a satellite in space. I think they kind of embrace the fact that this is Superman. We can make these things ridiculous. And at times they came off as just that, ridiculous. But I felt like I was seeing stuff I hadn't seen before, which seems kind of to contrast what Bob was saying. But but it was different, and I liked that. It felt Superman level mayhem was going on.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I'm glad you guys brought up the speed up, slow down thing, because that was pretty cool. I did enjoy that. I guess the level of mayhem, I guess I can see how it was Superman-y in a specific way, but it just, for me, it didn't feel that much different. Maybe I've just seen a lot of action movies, and maybe it was zoomed out on a bigger scale, but it still didn't quite do it for me. I think part of the problem with Superman 2 is that you're also rolling your eyes through because you're sort of wondering when it's going to end and what the secret weapon is. And spoiler alert, the way that he ends up, killing the bad guy, as if that never happens in a movie, it's not that big of a spoiler, is like it's such a basic human move that has nothing to do with destruction or any of that kind of stuff. It just felt very like, oh, really? Okay, so all that before was for no reason other than for my visual entertainment.
Yeah, he could have stood in front of those heat rays that were coming out or something like that. I think he could have found a lot of creative Superman-y kind of solutions to that and just didn't.
Right.
And it was like, oh, I guess that could have been done a long time ago and saved, millions of people and billions of property damage.
So before we get, or you already mentioned your rating, right, Bob? I haven't yet, but we've gone a while on this. But there's one more thing I need us to talk about. It should have been done in the earlier section here, but one thing bothered me, and it turned out to be a lot, probably more than is proportional to what it was. But did I just miss, or was I expected to know from my outside knowledge of Superman exactly how Clark found that his dad's ship up in the ice there? I felt like I was really hoping for more explanation on that, but he was just there with the government looking for it, and Lois Lane there too. But he was already there. I didn't know he was going looking for that or how he found it, and I felt like that looking for who he is, that was part of the 50%, the half-baked movie that I wish I had seen, and that would have made it into a lot better part there.
It sounds like you did miss one little aspect. There was like a rumor dropped, or he overheard some conversation that said something cool was going on up there. But it was kind of a weak transition towards getting there. It's like he's just checking out every rumor he hears of something that could be awesome.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so that leads me with an unsatisfying resolution there, and enough that I'm going to 2 stars on this.
Whoa.
A 2, like not even a 2.5?
I spent a lot of this movie. I spent a lot of this movie being really annoyed. Like, oh, come on. Oh, no.
I did too. When Zod brought the last hope of his civilization into battle and just started using it to shoot people, it's like, that ain't smart. When Superman basically commits genocide for all of Kryptonians, you're like, well, I guess there's a loophole where maybe he didn't do that, but so much fell out of the characters that I've grown to love, and even though I liked the action and the progression of the movie, it was that twisting of Superman that really took me out of it. So I don't think I can give it, as much as when I left it, I want to be like, oh, this is like a 4.5 star movie. When I think about it, for me, it comes down to like 3.5.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Well, there we go. Man of Steel. Thanks for joining us for this segment, Nick. It was great to have you and your perspective. Go see it if you want. I guess our average is around 3-ish stars.
Yep.
Okay. Hey, thanks a lot for being with us, Nick.